My name is Elena Vasquez, and I'm 28 years old. 3 weeks ago, I returned from my final military deployment to discover that my childhood home had been sold, my inheritance stolen, and my own family had declared me dead. But what they didn't know was that the sister they betrayed had just completed the most classified operation in modern military history. And the evidence I carried in my backpack would change everything. Before I tell you how I exposed the truth and got my revenge, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And make sure to hit that subscribe button, because this story has more twists than you can imagine. Growing up in Phoenix, Arizona, our family ran the most successful private security firm in the Southwest. Vasquez Security Solutions wasn't just a business. It was a legacy built by my grandfather, expanded by my father Miguel, and destined to be inherited by the next generation. That was supposed to be me and my twin brother Diego, but twins don't always turn out the same way. While I excelled in academics, learned 3 languages, and trained in martial arts, Diego preferred parties, expensive cars, and finding shortcuts to success. Our father saw potential in both of us, but I could tell he worried about Diego's work ethic. Mom, Isabella, always defended Diego, claiming he just needed time to mature. When we turned 18, Dad made us both junior partners in the company, giving us each 15% shares while he retained 70%. "This will teach you responsibility," he said. "Someday, you'll run this together." Diego immediately started treating his partnership like a trust fund, showing up late to meetings, delegating his responsibilities to employees, and spending his dividends on luxury items. Meanwhile, I threw myself into learning every aspect of the business, from cybersecurity protocols to executive protection strategies. The tension came to a head during my junior year of college when I was studying international security with a focus on counterterrorism. Dad called a family meeting to discuss expanding into government contracts. "We have an opportunity to bid on federal security contracts," Dad explained, "but it requires someone with military or intelligence experience to lead that division." I immediately saw the potential. I could join the military after graduation, gain the necessary experience, then return to lead that expansion. Diego laughed dismissively. "Elena, you're being dramatic. We can just hire someone with military experience. Why would you waste years in the army when you could be here building our business?" But I had already made up my mind. The military represented everything our security business claimed to embody: discipline, honor, service, and sacrifice. If I was going to lead this company someday, I needed to understand these values from the inside out. Dad supported my decision, even though it meant delaying his retirement plans. Mom cried when I enlisted, but she understood my reasoning. Diego, however, saw it as abandonment. "You're choosing strangers over family," he accused me the night before I left for basic training. "Don't expect everything to be waiting for you when you decide to come back." I should have paid more attention to that warning. Basic training at Fort Benning was exactly what I needed. The physical challenges pushed my limits, but the mental discipline gave me clarity I'd never experienced. For the first time in my life, I was judged purely on merit, not compared to my brother or evaluated based on family expectations. My background in security studies and language skills caught my commanding officer's attention immediately. After completing basic training, I was selected for military intelligence specialist training, followed by additional certification in counterintelligence operations. That's where I met Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, a 15-year veteran who became my mentor and the most influential person in my military career. Sarah had served in some of the most sensitive operations around the globe, and she saw something in me that even I didn't recognize yet. "Vasquez," she told me during a training exercise, "you have an unusual combination of analytical thinking and instinctive judgment. Most people excel at one or the other. That combination makes you valuable for very specific types of missions." 2 years into my service, I received my first overseas deployment to Eastern Europe. The details remain classified, but I can tell you that my work involved monitoring and disrupting intelligence networks that threatened NATO security interests. The work was complex, dangerous, and absolutely critical to national security. My letters home during this period were carefully censored for operational security, but I tried to keep my family updated on my general well-being and career progression. Dad's responses were proud and supportive. Mom sent care packages and photos of family gatherings. Diego's communications were sporadic and increasingly distant. During my 3rd year of service, I received devastating news. Dad had suffered a massive heart attack and passed away suddenly while I was in the middle of a sensitive operation. I requested emergency leave to attend the funeral, but the timing coincided with a critical phase of our mission that required my specific expertise. The decision to stay and complete the mission was the hardest I've ever made. I missed my father's funeral to protect an operation that ultimately saved hundreds of lives, but that's not something I could explain to my grieving family. By the time I returned to the United States 3 weeks later, Dad had been buried, his affairs had been settled, and Diego had assumed control of the family business. The conversation we had when I finally made it home revealed how much had changed. "I'm sorry I couldn't be here," I told Diego as we stood in Dad's empty office. "The mission I was on, save it, Elena," he interrupted. "You made your choice. Dad needed his family, and you chose your military career over him. The accusation was unfair and painful, but I understood his grief was influencing his words." "What happens now with the company?" I asked. Diego's expression grew cold. "Dad left everything to me. The house, the business, all of it. Apparently, he decided that the child who stayed and helped him was more deserving than the one who abandoned him. This didn't sound like our father, but I was too emotionally drained to challenge it immediately. Can I see the will? It's with the lawyers. But Elena, the bottom line is that I'm running Vasquez Security Solutions now, and frankly, there isn't a place for you here anymore. I left that meeting stunned and heartbroken. Not only had I lost my father, but apparently I had lost my family legacy as well. I threw myself back into my military service with renewed intensity, using the pain as motivation to excel in increasingly challenging assignments. 3 years after Dad's death, I had advanced to staff sergeant and was leading a small team of intelligence specialists. Our work had expanded beyond Eastern Europe to include operations across multiple continents, always focusing on threats to American interests that required delicate, covert responses. That's when Colonel Mitchell approached me with an opportunity that would define the rest of my military career. "Elena, I need someone I trust absolutely for a deep cover assignment," she explained during a classified briefing. "We've identified a sophisticated network selling American military technology to hostile nations. The operation has tentacles reaching into defense contractors, government agencies, and private security firms." She handed me a thick folder marked with the highest classification levels. "This isn't just about stopping a few illegal sales. This network has compromised operations that got American soldiers killed. We need someone who can infiltrate their organization and gather evidence that will hold up in federal court. The assignment would require me to assume a completely new identity for up to 2 years. I would be officially listed as missing in action on all military records to protect the operation's security. Even my family would be told that I had been killed in a classified operation, with my death details sealed for national security reasons. This is dangerous work, Elena," Colonel Mitchell warned me. "If you're discovered, we can't acknowledge the operation or extract you safely. And maintaining your cover means cutting all contact with your previous life until the mission is complete." The sacrifice was enormous, but the potential impact of the operation convinced me to accept. If this network was responsible for American deaths, I had to help stop them. For the next 18 months, Elena Vasquez ceased to exist. I became Maya Chen, a former military contractor with cybersecurity expertise looking for high-paying work in the gray areas of international security. The identity was perfect for infiltrating the network we were investigating. My new persona allowed me to gain the trust of the organization's leadership and document their entire operation. I recorded meetings, copied financial records, and identified every person involved in the conspiracy. The evidence I gathered would eventually lead to over 40 arrests and the recovery of millions of dollars in stolen technology. But the most shocking discovery came during my final months undercover. has. I penetrated deeper into the organization's structure. I began recognizing names and companies that seemed familiar. My blood ran cold when I saw a file marked Vasquez Security Solutions, Phoenix Operations. Diego wasn't just a client of this criminal network, he was a founding partner. The documents revealed everything. After Dad's death, Diego had inherited the company as I'd been told, but the business was struggling financially. Rather than adapt to changing market conditions or seek legitimate investment, Diego had partnered with the criminal network to sell security system vulnerabilities to foreign buyers. Vasquez Security Solutions was installing security systems for government facilities and defense contractors, then selling the technical specifications to hostile foreign agents. The very company our father had built to protect American interests was being used to compromise national security. But the personal betrayal went even deeper. I found correspondence between Diego and the network's leadership discussing me specifically. Diego had provided them with detailed information about my military service, my skills, and my psychological profile. They were planning to recruit me when I eventually returned home, using my family connections and military background to expand their operations. If that recruitment failed, they had contingency plans to eliminate me as a security threat. My own brother had sold me out to criminals who were prepared to kill me. The final piece of evidence that shattered my trust came in the form of legal documents, hidden in the network's files. Dad's real will, the one Diego had hidden from me, left the company equally to both of his children. Diego had forged documents to claim sole inheritance, probably with help from his criminal associates. Not only had Diego betrayed his country and dishonored our father's legacy, but he had stolen my inheritance and left me to believe I had been rejected by the father I loved. Completing the undercover operation while processing the personal betrayal was the most difficult thing I had ever done. I had to maintain my cover identity and continue building the case against the criminal network, all while knowing that my own brother was one of the primary targets. Colonel Mitchell noticed my distress during our covert communications. "Elena, I can see something is affecting you. Are you compromised?" "No, ma'am," I replied. "But there are personal complications that will need to be addressed when this operation concludes." She studied my expression carefully. "Family?" "Yes, ma'am. Do you want to be reassigned?" "We can find another way to complete this mission." I considered the offer seriously, but ultimately declined. "With respect, Colonel, I'm the best person to finish this job, and I need to see it through to the end." The investigation's conclusion was swift and decisive. Federal agents, armed with the evidence I had gathered, conducted simultaneous raids across 12 states. 43 individuals were arrested, including government employees, defense contractors, and private security executives. Diego was arrested at the Vasquez Security Solutions offices on a Tuesday morning while meeting with potential clients. The charges against him included espionage, conspiracy to commit treason, fraud, and racketeering. The evidence was overwhelming, and his assets were immediately frozen pending trial. I watched his arrest through surveillance footage from our operations command center. Even seeing him led away in handcuffs, I felt more sadness than satisfaction. This was my twin brother, the person I had shared a womb with, played with as a child, and loved despite our differences. But he had chosen greed over loyalty, criminality over honor, and personal gain over family bonds. My official return from the dead required careful coordination between military intelligence, the FBI, and federal prosecutors. Elena Vasquez had been missing in action for 18 months, and now she needed to reappear without compromising ongoing national security operations. The cover story was simple. I had been captured during a classified operation, held prisoner by hostile forces, and recently rescued in a joint operation that remained classified for operational security reasons. This explanation protected the undercover assignment while allowing me to resume my identity. Colonel Mitchell personally oversaw my reintegration process. "Elena, what you accomplished during this operation will have lasting impact on national security," she told me during my debriefing. But I understand there are personal matters you need to resolve as well. She was right. Despite the success of the operation and the satisfaction of stopping a major threat to American security, I felt hollow inside. The brother I had loved was facing decades in federal prison, my father was gone, and I had no family left to return to. "What happens now?" I asked. "That depends on what you want," Colonel Mitchell replied. "You've served with exceptional distinction, and there are opportunities for you to continue in intelligence work at the highest levels. Or, if you choose to return to civilian life, your service record will open doors anywhere you want to go." The decision seemed obvious at first. I had found purpose and identity in the military that I had never experienced in civilian life. Why wouldn't I continue serving? But as I processed the events of the past few years, I realized there was unfinished business I needed to address. My father's legacy had been corrupted by Diego's criminality, but it could be redeemed if someone was willing to rebuild it properly. "I want to go home," I told Colonel Mitchell. "There's something I need to fix." My return to Phoenix felt surreal. The city had continued growing and changing while I was gone, but the fundamental character remained the same. Vasquez Security Solutions was located in the same office building where I had worked during high school, but federal seizure notices covered the windows and doors. My first stop was the law office that had handled Dad's estate. The lawyer, James Morrison, had been a family friend for decades, and his reaction to seeing me was a mixture of shock and joy. "Elena, we were told you died in military service." This is incredible." I explained the cover story about my captivity and rescue, then got straight to the point. "Mr. Morrison, I need to see my father's real will. Not the version Diego showed me, but the actual document Dad signed." His expression grew uncomfortable. "Elena, I don't understand. The will was read and executed according to your father's wishes. Diego forged the inheritance documents," I explained, providing him with copies of evidence from the federal investigation. "I have proof that Dad left the company to both of his children equally." Morrison studied the documents with growing alarm. "My God, Elena. If this is true, then Diego committed multiple felonies in addition to the espionage charges." "It's true," I confirmed. "And now I need your help to reclaim what was rightfully mine." The legal process was complex, but straightforward. Diego's criminal conviction made it impossible for him to contest my claims, and the evidence of document forgery was irrefutable. Within 3 months, I had legal ownership of Vasquez Security Solutions and all associated assets. But owning the company was only the first step. The business was in ruins, its reputation destroyed by Diego's criminal activities and its contracts canceled by government agencies that could no longer trust the Vasquez name. I had to decide whether to sell the assets and walk away, or attempt to rebuild our father's legacy from scratch. The decision to rebuild, rather than liquidate, came during a conversation with Mom, who had been living in quiet shame since Diego's arrest. She had known something was wrong with the business but hadn't understood the full scope of his criminal activities. "Your father would be heartbroken to see what happened to his company," she told me as we sat in the empty office space. "But he would also be proud to see you trying to rebuild it properly." That conversation convinced me to invest my energy and resources into creating something better than what had existed before. I wouldn't just restore Vasquez Security Solutions, I would transform it into something that embodied the values Dad had always claimed to represent. My military experience had taught me that real security isn't just about technology and protocols, it's about people making ethical decisions under pressure. The new Vasquez Security Solutions would prioritize integrity over profit and service over self-interest. I started by assembling a team of military veterans who shared my values and understood the importance of ethical conduct in security work. My first hire was Marcus Johnson, a former Navy SEAL who had transitioned to civilian security work after completing his service. Marcus became my operations director and helped establish training standards that emphasized both technical competence and moral character. Our business model focused on 3 core services: executive protection for at-risk individuals, cybersecurity consulting for small and medium businesses, and security training for organizations that wanted to improve their safety protocols. We deliberately avoided government contracts initially, recognizing that rebuilding trust would take time. The company's reputation gradually improved as we demonstrated consistent professionalism and ethical behavior. Our veteran hiring practices attracted positive media attention, and our commitment to community service helped establish relationships with local law enforcement and emergency response agencies. Within 18 months, we had grown from a one-person operation to a team of 25 employees, all of whom had been carefully vetted for both competence and character. The real vindication came 2 years after Diego's conviction, when federal prosecutors contacted me with an unusual request. The evidence I had gathered during my undercover operation had led to the recovery of millions of dollars in assets from the criminal network. As a victim of Diego's fraud and identity theft, I was entitled to financial compensation from the recovered funds. But more importantly, the federal government wanted to offer Vasquez Security Solutions a contract to help develop new protocols for preventing similar infiltration of private security firms. This wasn't just about money. It was about recognition that the rebuilt company represented exactly the kind of ethical, competent security service that government agencies needed to partner with. The contract would require expanding our team significantly and obtaining higher levels of security clearance, but it also represented the ultimate redemption of our family name. Dad's company, which had been corrupted by Diego's greed, would now help protect America from the very type of threats Diego had helped create. Colonel Mitchell attended the contract signing ceremony, now wearing the eagles of a full colonel thanks partly to the success of our undercover operation. "Elena," she told me afterward, "your father would be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished. You took something that was broken and made it better than it ever was before." Diego's sentencing hearing took place on a gray October morning 3 years after his arrest. Federal prosecutors recommended a 30-year prison sentence based on the scope of his crimes and the national security implications of his actions. I attended the hearing, not to gloat over his downfall, but to face this final chapter of our family's tragedy with dignity. When given the opportunity to speak, Diego offered what seemed like a genuine apology. His time in federal custody had apparently given him perspective on the magnitude of his crimes and their impact on everyone around him. "I want to apologize to my sister Elena," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I betrayed not just my country, but the person who loved me most in the world. She served our nation with honor while I dishonored everything our father taught us." He turned to look directly at me. "Elena, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've built from the wreckage I created. Dad would be proud too." The judge sentenced Diego to 25 years in federal prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. It was a severe sentence, but given the gravity of his crimes, it could have been much worse. After the hearing, I visited Diego before he was transferred to federal prison. "I don't forgive you for what you did to our country or to Dad's memory," I told him honestly. "But I forgive you for what you did to me. I hope you use your time in prison to become the person Dad always believed you could be." It wasn't a happy ending for Diego, but it was the beginning of his opportunity for redemption, just as his downfall had created mine. 5 years after rebuilding Vasquez Security Solutions, I received a call that would test everything I had learned about justice, forgiveness, and second chances. The caller was FBI agent Sarah Chen, who had worked on the original investigation that brought down Diego's criminal network. "Elena, we have a situation I think you should know about," she said. "Diego's been providing intelligence from prison about other criminal networks he had contact with before his arrest. The information has been valuable, and he's asked to speak with you about something related to your father." This was unexpected. Diego and I had maintained minimal contact during his incarceration, exchanging brief letters a few times per year, but avoiding deeper conversations about our family's destruction. "What does he want to discuss about Dad?" I asked. "He won't tell us," Agent Chen replied. "He says it's something he needs to tell you personally, and it relates to information that came to light during a recent investigation." I agreed to visit Diego at the Federal Correctional Institution where he was serving his sentence. The meeting took place in a secure conference room with FBI agents present to monitor our conversation. Diego looked older than his 33 years, but his eyes showed a clarity that had been missing during his criminal period. Prison had been difficult for him, but it seemed to have provided the perspective he had lacked as a free man. "Elena, thank you for coming," he began. "What I need to tell you is going to sound incredible, but I swear on Dad's memory that it's true." He explained that during a recent FBI investigation of another criminal network, agents had discovered evidence that our father's death wasn't natural. The heart attack that killed Dad had been induced using a sophisticated poison that mimicked cardiac arrest symptoms. "The people I was working with killed Dad," Diego said, his voice hollow with guilt. "They were afraid he was getting suspicious about my activities, and they needed him eliminated before he could investigate or change his will." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Diego's criminal associates stolen our inheritance and betrayed our country, but they had murdered our father to protect their operation. "Did you know?" I asked, struggling to control my emotions. "No," Diego replied immediately. "I swear to you, Elena, I had no idea until the FBI showed me the evidence last week. If I had known they were planning to hurt Dad, I would have stopped them or died trying." Agent Chen provided me with copies of the evidence Diego had referenced. The documentation was convincing and detailed, showing how the criminal network had targeted our father for elimination when they realized he was becoming suspicious of Diego's activities and finances. This information is going to be used to bring additional charges against several members of the organization, Agent Chen explained. "But we wanted you to know the truth about your father's death before it becomes part of the public record. Learning that Dad had been murdered rather than dying of natural causes changed everything about how I understood our family's tragedy. Diego's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also led directly to our father's death. The additional investigation and prosecutions took another year to complete, but ultimately resulted in 5 more convictions for Dad's murder and conspiracy charges. The evidence Diego provided from prison proved crucial to achieving these convictions, and his cooperation was noted by federal prosecutors. During this period, I struggled with conflicting emotions about my brother. His information had helped bring our father's killers to justice, but his original crimes had created the situation that led to Dad's murder. Colonel Mitchell, now retired from active duty but still serving as an occasional consultant, helped me process these complex feelings. "Elena, you can't control what Diego did in the past," she told me during one of our conversations. "But you can control how you respond to his efforts to make amends. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing his crimes. It means choosing not to let those crimes define your future." She was right. I had spent years rebuilding what Diego had destroyed, and I couldn't let his past actions continue to control my emotional well-being. The final resolution came when federal prosecutors offered Diego a reduced sentence in exchange for his continued cooperation with ongoing investigations. His sentence was reduced to 15 years with the possibility of parole after 10 years, contingent on his continued assistance to law enforcement. Diego asked me to attend his resentencing hearing, and this time I spoke on his behalf. "Your Honor," I told the judge, "I can't excuse my brother's crimes or minimize their impact on our national security and our family, but I can acknowledge that his cooperation has helped bring additional criminals to justice, including the people who murdered our father." I paused, choosing my words carefully. My brother destroyed our family's legacy through his criminal actions, but he's also helped me understand that redemption is possible even after the worst mistakes. I support the prosecution's recommendation for a reduced sentence. The judge accepted the plea agreement, and Diego was resentenced to 15 years with parole eligibility after 10 years, 7 years after returning from my undercover operation. Vasquez Security Solutions had grown into one of the most respected security firms in the Southwest. Our reputation for ethical conduct and technical excellence had attracted contracts with major corporations, government agencies, and international organizations. But the accomplishment I was most proud of was the Vasquez Foundation, a nonprofit organization I had established to provide career training and support services for military veterans transitioning to civilian careers. The foundation operated training programs in cybersecurity, executive protection, and emergency response, helping veterans leverage their military experience for civilian success. The foundation's flagship program was a partnership with federal law enforcement agencies to train veterans for careers in counterintelligence and national security. Graduates of this program had gone on to help prevent several terrorist plots and cyber attacks against American targets. Mom had become the foundation's board chair, finding purpose in helping other military families navigate the challenges of service and transition. Her involvement had helped her process the grief and shame from Diego's criminal period and find meaning in Dad's legacy. Your father always said that true security comes from people doing the right thing even when no one is watching, she told me during one of our board meetings. That's exactly what you've built here. The foundation had also attracted support from Colonel Mitchell, who served on our advisory board and helped develop training curricula based on her decades of intelligence experience. Elena, what you've created here honors not just your father's memory, but everyone who has served our country with integrity, she told me. This is how we build a better future, by teaching the next generation to choose service over self-interest. Diego was released on parole after serving 8 years of his sentence, thanks to his continued cooperation with federal investigations and good behavior in prison. His release date had been approaching for months, but I wasn't sure how I wanted to handle our first meeting as free adults. The decision was made for me when Diego called 3 days after his release. Elena, I know I don't have the right to ask anything from you, he said, but I wondered if we could meet somewhere neutral. I have some things I want to say, and I'd like to hear about what you've built with the company and the foundation. We met at a small coffee shop in downtown Phoenix, the same neighborhood where we had played as children. Diego looked healthier than he had during our prison visits, but there was a humility in his demeanor that hadn't existed before his incarceration. I've been thinking about this conversation for 8 years, he began. I know that saying I'm sorry isn't enough to repair what I broke, but I need you to know that I understand the full scope of what I did wrong. He had clearly prepared for this moment. I betrayed you personally by stealing your inheritance and lying about Dad's will. I betrayed our father's memory by corrupting the business he built with honest work. And I betrayed our country by selling security information to hostile foreign agents. I listened without interrupting, recognizing that this was something he needed to say as much as something I needed to hear. But the worst thing I did, Diego continued, was create the situation that led to Dad's death. Even though I didn't know they were going to kill him, my criminal activities made him a target. I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. When he finished, I shared my own perspective on our family's tragedy and recovery. Diego, I've spent years rebuilding what you destroyed, and I've found peace with most of what happened, I told him. But I need you to understand that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. You can't undo the choices you made or their consequences. I paused, considering my next words carefully. However, I believe people can change if they're willing to do the hard work of becoming better. Your cooperation with law enforcement and your behavior in prison suggests that you've been doing that work. Diego nodded, tears forming in his eyes. I don't expect you to trust me or want me in your life. I just hoped you'd give me a chance to prove that I've learned from my mistakes. The conversation continued for 2 hours, covering everything from childhood memories to future possibilities. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. Too much had happened for that. But it was the beginning of a new relationship, built on honesty rather than assumption. Diego's reintegration into society was challenging, as it is for most ex-convicts, but especially difficult for someone with his criminal history and notoriety. His federal convictions made it nearly impossible to find employment in any field related to security or technology. And many employers were reluctant to hire someone associated with espionage charges. After several months of unsuccessful job searching, Diego approached me with a proposal that surprised me. Elena, I know this might sound crazy, But I'd like to volunteer with the Vasquez Foundation's Veteran Transition Program, he said during one of our monthly coffee meetings. Not in any official capacity, and certainly not with access to sensitive information, but maybe helping with basic job preparation and interview skills. The suggestion seemed inappropriate at first. How could someone with Diego's criminal record counsel veterans about successful civilian transitions? But as I thought about it more, I realized that Diego's experience might actually be valuable in an unexpected way. He had made catastrophic choices and paid severe consequences, which gave him credibility when discussing the importance of ethical decision-making and personal integrity. I discussed the proposal with Mom and the Foundation's board of directors. The consensus was cautious but ultimately supportive, provided that Diego's involvement was limited, supervised, and fully disclosed to program participants. If Diego can help even one veteran avoid making the kinds of mistakes he made, then his participation might be worthwhile, Mom said, and it might be part of his own redemption process. Diego's first presentation to a group of transitioning veterans was awkward but authentic. He shared his story honestly, explaining how his choices had destroyed his family, betrayed his country, and ultimately led to his father's death. "I'm not here to give you career advice," he told the group. "I'm here to tell you what happens when you compromise your integrity for short-term gain. The military taught you to put service before self-interest. Don't forget that lesson when you transition to civilian life, because the temptations are real and the consequences are severe." The veterans responded positively to Diego's presentation, appreciating his honesty about his failures and their consequences. Several participants told me afterward that hearing from someone who had actually experienced the worst-case scenario of ethical compromise was more impactful than theoretical discussions about integrity. Years after my return from the undercover operation, Vasquez Security Solutions had achieved everything I had hoped for and more. We were recognized as one of the most ethical and effective security firms in the country. Our veteran training programs had helped hundreds of former service members successfully transition to civilian careers, and our work had contributed to preventing numerous threats to national security. The personal cost of rebuilding had been significant. I had devoted so much energy to restoring our family's reputation and creating something worthy of Dad's memory that I had neglected many aspects of my own life. I was professionally successful but personally isolated, respected by colleagues but lacking close personal relationships. That changed when I met Dr. Rebecca Santos at a conference on corporate security ethics. Rebecca was a professor at Arizona State University who specialized in organizational psychology and ethical leadership. Her presentation on moral decision-making in high-pressure environments was brilliant and directly relevant to my work. Our professional relationship gradually evolved into friendship, and eventually into something deeper. Rebecca understood the complexities of my family history and military background without needing extensive explanations. She had studied the psychological impacts of undercover work and family trauma, which gave her insight into challenges I hadn't even recognized in myself. "Elena, you've spent a decade proving that you're worthy of respect and trust," she told me during one of our early conversations about our relationship. "Maybe it's time to focus on proving that to yourself." She was right. I had been so focused on external validation, rebuilding the business, helping veterans, earning recognition for ethical conduct, that I hadn't addressed my own need for personal healing and growth. Rebecca's support and perspective helped me develop a more balanced approach to life and work. I began delegating more responsibilities to my capable team, taking actual vacations instead of just working remotely from different locations, and investing in personal relationships rather than just professional ones. The ultimate test of everything I had built came 5 years later when federal prosecutors approached me with another undercover operation proposal. A new criminal network had emerged, this one specifically targeting veteran-owned businesses for infiltration and exploitation. "Elena, your unique background makes you the ideal candidate for this operation," Agent Chen explained during a classified briefing. "You have credibility in the security industry, a personal understanding of how these networks operate, and proven ability to maintain cover under extreme pressure. The operation would require me to appear to compromise my own ethical standards, allowing the criminal network to believe they were successfully recruiting me. This would involve appearing to be willing to sell information about my clients and potentially endangering the reputation I had spent years building. "What's the timeline for this operation?" I asked. "Approximately 18 months, Agent Chen replied. "Similar to your previous undercover assignment, but with the added complexity of operating within your established identity rather than assuming a completely new one." I discussed the opportunity with Rebecca, whose opinion had become crucial to my major life decisions. "This is exactly the kind of work you're uniquely qualified for," she said, "but it's also going to put everything you've rebuilt at risk. Are you prepared for that possibility?" The question forced me to consider what mattered most. The business and foundation I had created were important, but they were ultimately just vehicles for serving purposes larger than myself. If sacrificing my reputation could prevent other veterans and businesses from being victimized by criminals, wasn't that consistent with the values I claimed to represent? I accepted the assignment. This undercover operation was more psychologically challenging than my previous assignment because it required me to appear to betray everything I had worked to build. The criminal network's recruitment process involved gradually compromising potential assets through small ethical violations that escalated over time. I had to appear receptive to their overtures while secretly documenting their methods and identifying their targets. This meant seeming to consider offers that would compromise my client's security in exchange for substantial financial payments. The psychological toll was immense. Every day, I had to pretend to be someone who would sell out veterans and betray the trust of people who depended on me for protection. The criminals tested my commitment by asking me to provide increasingly sensitive information about my clients and business operations. Marcus Johnson, my operations director and one of the few people who knew about the operation, served as my anchor to reality during this period. "Elena, I can see this assignment is eating you alive," he told me during one of our covert meetings. "Are you sure you can maintain this cover without losing yourself in the process?" His concern was valid. The line between my authentic self and my undercover persona was becoming dangerously blurred. I found myself questioning whether I was strong enough to maintain my integrity while appearing to abandon it completely. Rebecca provided crucial emotional support during this period, though she couldn't know the specific details of my work. She helped me develop psychological techniques for maintaining my sense of identity while playing a role that contradicted everything I believed in. "Remember that acting like someone you're not doesn't change who you actually are," she reminded me. "Your values and character exist independently of the performance you're giving for this assignment." The criminal network's operations were more sophisticated than we had initially understood. They weren't just targeting individual veteran-owned businesses. They were systematically infiltrating the entire veteran entrepreneurship ecosystem. Their ultimate goal was to gain access to federal contracts and classified information through businesses that had been founded by trusted military veterans. My apparent willingness to cooperate gave me access to their highest-level planning meetings, where I learned the full scope of their operation. They had successfully compromised dozens of veteran-owned businesses across multiple states, creating a shadow network of seemingly legitimate companies that were actually fronts for criminal activity. The evidence I gathered during this operation was even more comprehensive than what I had collected during my first undercover assignment. I documented financial transactions, recorded strategy meetings, and identified over 60 individuals involved in the conspiracy. But the most disturbing discovery was that they had been specifically targeting successful veteran entrepreneurs like me, using our military backgrounds and patriotic reputations as cover for their criminal activities. They had studied my previous work exposing Diego's network and viewed me as both a potential asset and a threat that needed to be neutralized. The operation's climax came when the network's leadership decided to test my commitment by asking me to facilitate an attack on a federal facility where several of my clients worked. They wanted me to provide security system specifications that would allow them to plant surveillance devices inside a classified government installation. This was the evidence federal prosecutors needed to demonstrate that the network posed a direct threat to national security. It was also my signal that the undercover operation had gathered sufficient evidence for successful prosecutions. The second network takedown was even more dramatic than the first. Federal agents conducted coordinated raids across 15 states, arresting 63 individuals and seizing millions of dollars in assets. The operation made national news as one of the largest counterintelligence successes in recent history. My role in the investigation remained classified, but the impact on my public reputation was significant anyway. Several of the businesses that had been compromised by the criminal network were my competitors, and their exposure as security risks elevated Vasquez Security Solutions' standing in the industry. More importantly, the operation protected hundreds of legitimate veteran-owned businesses from criminal infiltration and prevented potentially devastating breaches of national security. Colonel Mitchell, now working as a private security consultant, attended the press conference announcing the arrests. This operation demonstrates why ethical leadership is so crucial in the security industry, she told reporters. The criminals targeted veteran-owned businesses specifically because they assumed military. Veterans would be easier to compromise or less likely to be suspected of wrongdoing. The personal cost of the operation had been significant, but the results justified the sacrifice. I had spent 18 months appearing to betray everything I believed in, but in reality, I had protected the very values I was pretending to compromise. 6 months after the second network's takedown, I received a call from the White House saying the president wanted to personally recognize my contributions to national security in a private ceremony that would acknowledge my classified service without revealing operational details. The ceremony took place in the Oval Office with only the president, Colonel Mitchell, Agent Chen, and Rebecca in attendance. The president awarded me the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor, for my extraordinary contributions to national security through undercover operations that had prevented numerous threats to American interests. Ms. Vasquez, the president said during the brief ceremony, your willingness to sacrifice your reputation and personal safety to protect our nation represents the highest ideals of American service. The operations you participated in have saved countless lives and protected our most sensitive national security assets. The medal was beautiful, but more meaningful was the recognition that my sacrifice had mattered. The years of isolation, the psychological toll of maintaining cover identities, and the personal cost of rebuilding from Diego's betrayal had all contributed to protecting the country I loved. After the ceremony, Rebecca and I walked through the White House gardens discussing the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. 10 years ago, you were a disgraced veteran whose family had betrayed her, she observed. Now you're one of the most decorated undercover operatives in American history. How does that feel? The question required careful consideration. It feels like Dad would be proud, I finally answered. Not because of the medals or recognition, but because I chose to serve something bigger than myself when it would have been easier to walk away. With my undercover career officially concluded, I focused on expanding the Vasquez Foundation's impact. Our programs had grown to serve veterans across the entire Southwest, and our success had attracted attention from other organizations wanting to replicate our model. The Foundation's newest initiative was a partnership with major corporations to create pathways for veteran entrepreneurs to access capital and mentorship. Too many veteran-owned businesses failed not because of poor management or weak business models, but because their founders lacked access to the networks and resources that help businesses thrive. Diego had become one of the Foundation's most effective speakers, sharing his story of ethical failure and redemption with groups of transitioning veterans. His presentations were powerful because they came from someone who had experienced the worst consequences of compromising one's integrity. I had everything, he would tell audiences: a successful family business, financial security, and the respect of my community. I lost it all because I chose short-term gain over long-term values. Don't make my mistakes. His involvement with the Foundation had helped him rebuild relationships with some members of our extended family and find purpose in his post-incarceration life. It wasn't complete redemption. The people who died because of his criminal activities couldn't be brought back, and the trust he had betrayed couldn't be fully restored. But it was progress. Mom had become the Foundation's most passionate advocate, using her experience as a military mother to connect with other families, navigating the challenges of service and transition. Elena didn't just rebuild our family's business. She would tell donors and supporters, she rebuilt our family's honor. The Foundation allows us to share that restoration with other military families who are facing their own challenges. Rebecca and I married 3 years after my final undercover operation, in a small ceremony attended by family, close friends, and military colleagues. Colonel Mitchell served as my maid of honor, while Marcus walked me down the aisle in Dad's absence. The wedding represented more than just a personal milestone. It symbolized my transition from a life defined by secrets and isolation to one characterized by openness and connection. For the first time since my original military deployment, I was fully present in my own life rather than maintaining a cover identity or preparing for the next mission. Our honeymoon was a 2-week trip to Europe, visiting countries where I had served during my military career but had never seen as a tourist. Walking through Prague, Vienna, and Budapest as Rebecca's wife, rather than as an intelligence operative, was transformative. These cities held memories of danger and sacrifice, but now they were also places of beauty and culture that I could appreciate without the weight of classified responsibilities. "You seem different here," Rebecca observed as we sat in a cafe in Budapest, watching people go about their daily lives in a city where I had once conducted surveillance operations. "More relaxed than I've ever seen you." She was right. For the first time in over a decade, I was simply Elena Vasquez rather than Staff Sergeant Vasquez, undercover operative Maya Chen, or CEO Vasquez carrying the weight of family redemption. I was just a woman on her honeymoon with the person she loved most. Rebecca and I settled into married life with the contentment of people who had both waited long enough to find the right partner. She continued her academic work on organizational psychology while also serving as an unofficial counselor for Foundation participants who were struggling with transition challenges. Her research on moral decision-making in high-stress environments became influential in military and corporate training programs, and she was frequently invited to speak at conferences and workshops. Several of her academic papers referenced my experiences, with appropriate anonymization, as case studies in ethical leadership under extreme pressure. We bought a house in the foothills outside Phoenix, far enough from the city to provide privacy and peace, but close enough for easy access to the Foundation and business operations. The house included a separate office building where I could conduct classified meetings and secure communications when necessary. Our life together was enrichingly normal in ways I had never experienced before. We hosted dinner parties for friends, took weekend hiking trips, adopted 2 rescue dogs, and began talking about starting a family. "I never thought I wanted children until I met you," Rebecca told me one evening as we watched the sunset from our back patio. "But seeing how you've rebuilt your family's legacy makes me want to be part of creating the next generation of that legacy." The idea of becoming a mother felt both thrilling and terrifying. My own childhood had been marked by sibling rivalry and family dysfunction, and my adult life had been defined by military service and undercover operations. Did I have the emotional capacity to provide the stability and security that children deserve? "What if I'm too damaged by everything I've experienced?" I asked Rebecca during one of our conversations about family planning. "What if I can't give children the normal childhood they deserve?" Rebecca's response was characteristically insightful. "Elena, normal childhoods are overrated. What children need is love, consistency, and parents who model integrity and resilience. You've demonstrated all of those qualities repeatedly." The culmination of my professional recognition came 5 years after my final undercover operation when I was invited to speak at the FBI National Academy's graduation ceremony. The Academy trains law enforcement leaders from around the world, and the invitation to address their graduation represented acknowledgement of my contributions to national security and ethical leadership. My speech focused on the importance of maintaining integrity under pressure, using carefully chosen examples from my military and civilian experience that didn't compromise classified information. Leadership isn't about having all the answers, I told the graduating class. It's about making ethical choices when you don't know what the consequences will be. Some of you will face situations where doing the right thing costs you personally. In those moments, remember that your character is defined not by what's easy, but by what's right. After the ceremony, Agent Chen approached me with news that brought my career full circle. Elena, I wanted you to know that the intelligence you gathered during both undercover operations is still generating results, she said. Information from those cases has been used to prevent 3 additional criminal networks from forming, and the training protocols you helped develop are now standard procedure for similar operations. The recognition was gratifying, but what mattered more was knowing that my sacrifice had continuing impact beyond the immediate arrests and convictions. The work I had done in the shadows was creating ripple effects that would protect American interests for years to come. 10 years after marrying Rebecca, we had built the life neither of us had dared to hope for during our individual journeys through trauma and professional challenges. Our daughter Maria was 8 years old, brilliant and compassionate like her mother, but with a fierce sense of justice that reminded everyone of me. Our son David was 5, enthusiastic about everything and particularly fascinated by stories of military service and heroism. Both children knew that Mommy Elena had been a soldier and now ran a company that helped other veterans, but they were too young to understand the classified aspects of my service. The Vasquez Foundation had expanded to operate in 12 states, helping over 2,000 veterans annually transition to successful civilian careers. Our corporate training programs on ethical leadership were used by major corporations and government agencies across the country. Vasquez Security Solutions had grown into a mid-sized firm with over 100 employees, all of whom had been carefully vetted for both competence and character. Our reputation for integrity had made us the preferred security provider for organizations that valued ethical conduct over lowest bid pricing. Diego had completed his parole successfully and was now the Foundation's full-time coordinator for reintegration services. His transformation from criminal to counselor wasn't complete. He would always carry the guilt of his actions and their consequences, but he had found meaning in helping others avoid his mistakes. I can never undo what I did, he told me during one of our regular family dinners. But maybe I can prevent someone else from making similar choices. If I can help even one person choose integrity over compromise, then maybe Dad's death and everything that followed will have some meaning. Mom had lived to see both her children find redemption in their own ways. She passed away peacefully at age 74, surrounded by family and secure in the knowledge that Dad's legacy had been restored and expanded beyond what he had originally built. As my children grew older, they began asking more sophisticated questions about my military service and the family history they had inherited. Maria, now 12, was particularly interested in understanding why Uncle Diego had made such destructive choices and how people could recover from serious mistakes. "Mommy, why did Uncle Diego steal from Grandpa?" she asked one evening as I was helping her with homework. "Didn't he love him?" The question required a careful response that acknowledged the complexity of human motivation without excusing criminal behavior. Uncle Diego did love Grandpa, I explained. But sometimes people make bad choices because they're afraid or angry or want things they don't deserve. Uncle Diego was afraid that he wasn't good enough to inherit Grandpa's business, so he tried to take shortcuts instead of doing the hard work to earn it. Maria considered this explanation seriously. "Is that why you joined the army? To prove you were good enough?" Her perceptiveness surprised me. Partly, yes, but also because I wanted to serve something bigger than myself. The army taught me that real strength comes from helping others, not from getting what you want for yourself. David, now 8, had different questions that focused more on the adventure aspects of military service. "Mom, did you ever fight bad guys like in the movies?" he asked during one of our weekend hiking trips. Not exactly like in the movies, I replied carefully. Real life is more complicated than movies make it seem. Sometimes the most important victories happen quietly, where nobody sees them. Both children were fascinated by the Foundation's work and often accompanied me to graduation ceremonies and special events. They had grown up around military veterans and understood that service came with both honor and sacrifice. When I grow up, I want to help veterans like you do, Mom, Maria announced during one Foundation event. But I want to be a doctor so I can help with their injuries too. The declaration filled me with pride and hope. My children were learning the values that had guided me through the darkest periods of my life: service, integrity, and commitment to something greater than personal interest. The ultimate test of everything I had built came when Maria was 15 and discovered the full truth about my military service through her own research for a school project on family history. She had been investigating our family's background and found news articles about Diego's criminal trial that mentioned classified aspects of my service record. "Mom, I need to ask you about something," she said one evening after dinner, her tone unusually serious for a teenager. "I was researching our family history for my AP history project, and I found some articles about Uncle Diego's trial that mentioned you received classified military honors. Is that true?" The moment I had been preparing for since her birth had finally arrived. My children deserved to know the truth about their family's history, but I also needed to protect classified information and help them understand the complexity of the choices I had made. Rebecca and I had discussed this conversation many times, knowing it would eventually be necessary. We had decided to be as honest as possible while still respecting security requirements and age-appropriate boundaries. "Yes, it's true," I told Maria. "Some aspects of my military service remain classified for national security reasons, but I can tell you that I worked in intelligence operations that helped protect American interests overseas." Maria pressed for more details. "The articles mentioned that you went undercover to stop criminal networks. Is that why you're so passionate about integrity and ethics?" Her question demonstrated the maturity and insight she had developed through years of watching me work with veterans and build ethical organizations. "Partly, yes," I admitted. "I've seen what happens when people compromise their values for personal gain. Uncle Diego's choices didn't just hurt our family, they helped criminals who threatened our country's security. I never want you or David to face those kinds of temptations without understanding their consequences." The conversation continued for several hours, covering topics I hadn't discussed with anyone outside my closest military colleagues. Maria asked thoughtful questions about moral decision-making, the psychology of undercover work, and the personal cost of classified service. "Are you proud of what you did in the military?" she asked finally. "Yes," I replied without hesitation, not because it was glamorous or exciting, but because it mattered. The work I did helped prevent people from being hurt and protected freedoms that we all depend on. Maria nodded thoughtfully. "I understand why you couldn't tell us everything before, but I'm glad you trust me enough to tell me now." Her mature response reinforced my confidence that Rebecca and I were raising children who would carry forward the values we had worked so hard to embody and teach. As I approached my 50th birthday, I began thinking seriously about succession planning for both the business and foundation. Maria was studying international relations and cybersecurity at Stanford University, while David was showing early interest in military service and emergency response careers. Neither child felt pressured to join the family business, but both understood that they were inheriting a legacy built on service, integrity, and commitment to helping others. Whatever careers they chose, they would carry forward the values that had guided our family through its darkest periods and greatest triumphs. Colonel Mitchell, now in her 70s but still sharp and engaged, had become a grandmother figure to my children and continued serving on the Foundation's advisory board. "Elena, what you've built is remarkable not just because of its size or impact, but because of its staying power," she told me during one of our quarterly board meetings. "You've created institutions that can outlast any individual leader because they're based on principles rather than personalities. Her observation prompted me to begin writing a memoir that could serve as both a personal record and a guide for future leaders of the organizations I had built. The memoir would need to balance transparency about my experiences with protection of classified information, but it could provide insights into ethical leadership under extreme pressure. The writing process forced me to reflect on the journey from disgraced family member to decorated veteran to successful entrepreneur. Each phase had required different skills and sacrifices, but all had been guided by the same fundamental commitment to service over self-interest. As I finished writing this story, sitting in the office where Dad once planned construction projects and Diego later planned criminal conspiracies, I realized that the ultimate revenge against those who had betrayed my family wasn't punishment or public humiliation, it was success. Diego's criminal associates had tried to destroy our family's reputation and legacy. Instead, their actions had motivated me to build something far greater than what they had tried to corrupt. The Vasquez name, which they had sought to associate with treason and greed, was now synonymous with integrity and service. The criminals who had murdered my father thought they were eliminating a threat to their operation. Instead, they had created an enemy who would spend the next decade systematically dismantling criminal networks and protecting the very institutions they had tried to exploit. Diego himself had tried to steal my inheritance and exclude me from our family's legacy. Instead, his betrayal had taught me the skills and values necessary to build a legacy far more meaningful than anything he could have imagined. Most importantly, the classified nature of my service had initially felt like a burden, recognition I could never claim, sacrifices that would never be acknowledged, contributions that would remain hidden. But that secrecy had actually been a gift, forcing me to find satisfaction in the work itself rather than in external validation. The revenge story that began with a forged will and a stolen inheritance had ended with a rebuilt family, a thriving business, a successful foundation, and 2 children who understood that true strength comes from serving others rather than serving yourself. If you're watching this because you've faced betrayal from people you trusted, know that their actions don't define your worth or limit your potential. The pain of betrayal can become the fuel for building something better than what was destroyed. If you're a veteran struggling with the transition to civilian life, remember that your service has given you skills and values that the world desperately needs. Find ways to use those gifts in service of something bigger than yourself, and you'll discover purpose that goes beyond personal success. If you're facing ethical choices that could compromise your integrity for personal gain, remember that shortcuts always have hidden costs. The temporary benefits of compromising your values are never worth the long-term consequences to your character and relationships. The most meaningful victories in life aren't the ones that happen in public with applause and recognition. They're the quiet moments when you choose to do the right thing even when no one is watching, when you serve others even when there's no personal benefit, and when you build something worthy of the people who believed in you. My father never got to see the full restoration of his legacy, but I know he would be proud of what his daughter built from the ashes of his son's betrayal. Sometimes the greatest honor you can give someone isn't protecting what they created, but using their values to create something even better. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please share it with others who might need to hear that betrayal isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning of a new chapter. And remember, the best revenge is a life well lived in service of something greater than yourself.